Before Thoth was a god, before he was a name carried into temples and carved beside the moon, he was only a man with a throat-shaped name. It was not spoken lightly. It began low, behind the tongue, with breath pressed against the back of the mouth, and it ended almost before it became sound. Thoth, a hard name for a hard world. He lived before writing, before drawn borders, before men made marks that could travel without the hand that taught them. In his day, knowledge was not something hidden in signs. Knowledge was something proven by return. The dry season had narrowed the valley until every sound seemed to come from thirst. The stream below the winter shelter no longer ran. It lay in dark cups between stones, green at the edges, watched by flies and guarded by need. Children woke in the night and pressed their tongues against cracked lips. The hunters came back with little more than dust on their legs and anger in their hands. Roots broke dry from the earth. Even the old women, who knew where food hid when the young thought the land empty, had begun to dig in silence. Thoth went out before dawn with Flint, the oldest man who could still climb. Flint's left eye had clouded after a bear struck him many winters earlier, but his right eye remained sharp enough to read broken stone, split bark, dung, hoof marks, and the dark green promise of plants rooted where water moved underground. He had seen deer vanish 2 days before through a cut in the eastern ridge, and where deer vanished in the dry season, something had called them. Thoth carried a skin, a chipped blade, and a hunger that had moved beyond his belly into his thoughts. They crossed the ridge while the air was still cool. At first the way seemed clear. A pale stone like a crouched hare, a thorn tree twisted by wind, a fall of shale where each step slid backward half a step, then a dry gully, then a slope of hard grass, then a place where the ground dipped and the smell changed. Flint stopped there and lowered himself to his knees. He pressed his palm to the soil, then touched the wetness to his lips. The water lay under a shelf of stone. It was not a spring one could hear. It did not sing. It gathered slowly in a basin shadowed from the sun, drop by drop from the rock above, cold enough to make Thoth's fingers ache when he put his hand into it. For a moment, he felt the whole valley saved. He saw the children drinking, the old ones washing their mouths, the skins filled and carried back. He wanted to shout, but Flint struck his arm and shook his head. A found place was not yet a saved people. The return nearly killed the discovery. By midday the land had changed its face. The pale stone that had looked like a crouched hare looked like any other stone when seen from behind. The thorn tree had brothers. The dry gullies multiplied. The sun had moved, and with it the shadows that had pointed their way. Flint led first and turned too low. Thoth recognized a broken stump, and then realized he had recognized the wrong one. They climbed too far west, came down through thorn, and spent the night cold under a ledge, listening to cats cough in the dark. When they reached the shelter the next morning, the people ran to the waterskin before they ran to the men. Then they saw Thoth's torn legs, Flint's bloody hand, and the fear that still sat behind their eyes. The basin existed. The way did not yet exist, not truly, not until it could be found, followed, and brought back into the life of the group. That evening Thoth sat alone outside the shelter mouth and placed 3 stones on the ground. 1 stone was the basin, 1 stone was the path outward, 1 stone was the return. He stared at them until the fire behind him sank low and the first cold came down from the ridge. The water alone was not enough. The walking alone was not enough. Coming home alone was not enough. The 3 had to hold together, or each one failed the others. A place was only useful if joined to a way. A way was only safe if joined to return. Return was only survival if it carried the place back with it. Later generations would wonder why ancient people marked the earth so insistently, why they remembered bends, crossings, ridges, hollows, and animal paths with such force. They would miss the first pressure unless they had also been thirsty. The world did not ask early people to make symbols. It asked them to survive distance. It asked them to bind resource, root, and return into one thought. The next morning, Thoth tried to tell the others where the water lay, and the failure of his mouth angered him. He pointed beyond the ridge. He bent his arm to show the hooked valley. He made the deer sound, then the stone sound, then opened his hands in the shape of a basin. The children watched with wide eyes. Dur, his younger brother, laughed because the gestures looked like a dance. Reed, who could follow birds by the way they startled from grass, understood more than the others. But even she looked past his shoulder as though the land he described might appear there if she stared hard enough. Flint listened for a while, then rose with a grunt. Words would not carry the water. Feet would. They went again, this time with Reed, Dur, and a boy called Ash, who was old enough to carry fire, but young enough to forget fear when something bright moved ahead of him. Thoth led slowly. At the first pale stone, he stopped and struck it twice with his palm. At the thorn tree, he broke a twig and held it toward the sunrise. At the dry gully, he forced Dur to climb down into it and out again, though there was an easier way around because the body had to know the cut. At the shale slope, he touched his thigh each time his foot struck, breath by breath, until the length of the slope became not a word, but an ache. At the turn above the basin, he turned with his whole body, shoulders, hips, knees, head, so the others felt the change rather than merely saw it. Dur stopped laughing before the sun rose high. The path entered him unwillingly, through scratches, thirst, balance, and repeated breath. Reed understood the method before she understood the destination. She began to repeat the turns under her breath, not as speech exactly, but as pulses of sound tied to motion. Ash stumbled often, but when they reached the basin and Thoth asked him to point back toward the shelter, the boy pointed almost correctly. Flint gave the smallest possible nod. On the way home, Thoth made them change leaders. Reed led from the basin to the broken tree. Ash led from the tree to the gully and forgot one turn until Reed pulled his hair and turned his face toward the ridge. Dur led across the thorn flat, proud and wrong, then ashamed and corrected. Each mistake mattered. A mistake made the path visible. Thoth watched them and felt the second thing join the first. The water was out there. The path could be walked. But unless the path entered more than one body, the water still belonged only to chance. His mind circled three needs. Nothing scratched on hide, nothing carved in bone, nothing that could hold the way outside a living person. The body as the only vessel deep enough to carry the path. Repetition as the only way to keep the vessel from leaking. That night he dreamed of feet moving without men. They crossed the ridge, descended the shale, bent at the gully, and returned in firelight. When he woke, he understood that the path was becoming a thing separate from any one walker. Not a mark yet, not an image, a repeated doing. His people were not wordless because they left no books. A body can remember with a precision that speech alone cannot keep. Before knowledge became written, it became walked. Before instruction became explanation, it was demonstration. A route learned only by hearing could vanish in one frightened turn. A route learned by the legs could survive darkness. On the fourth journey, Thoth began counting before anyone asked him why. He did not count as later people would count, with numbers cleanly separated from stones, animals, fingers, and days. His count was breath and touch, a pressure of thumb against finger. a tap against the thigh, a soft sound in the throat. The same sound repeated until a segment ended, then broken by a turn. From the shelter mouth to the pale stone, one long measure. From the pale stone to the thorn, another, shorter. From the thorn to the gully, half the first. Across the shale, long enough that Dur grew angry before it ended. Down into the gully and out, short, sharp, remembered by the knees. Thoth was not trying to trap the land into exactness. The land would not be trapped. Rain shifted soil. Fallen wood blocked easy lines. A child's stride differed from Flint's. A tired person walked shorter than a fresh one, but the count gave relation. This part was longer than that. This turn came after that much walking. This descent was half the climb. The way began to have bones. Reed saw the power of it first. She was smaller than Thoth, and when she tried to match his count with her own feet, she reached the turn too soon. At first she frowned, thinking herself wrong. Then she doubled her steps. Where Thoth made one long measure, she made two of hers. Where he counted 5 breath touches, she counted 10. Suddenly the path obeyed her body too. It did not belong to Thoth's legs alone. It could become larger or smaller and still remain itself. This discovery delighted her so much that she forgot to hide it. She ran part of the way back, stopped, returned, walked the same segment with smaller steps, then longer ones, laughing each time the turn came where it should. Flint watched in silence. To him, the matter was grave. If a path could change size and still keep its shape, then a thing held in one body could be taught to another body without being broken. At the shelter, Thoth scratched the root in dust with a charred stick. A long stroke, a turn, a shorter stroke, a hooked descent, a curve back toward home. The marks were poor. A wind crossed the shelter mouth and blurred one of them before he finished. A child stepped through the return line and destroyed it. But for a moment, the path had appeared small. Small enough to see all at once. Small enough to hold outside the body. Then, when Thoth rose and walked it again, the small thing became large. He sat awake long after the others slept, thinking of 3 powers that had come together without asking permission from words. The foot gave distance. The turn gave direction. The relation between one distance and another gave shape. He did not have names for these powers. He did not need names. He had felt them. Steps, turns, and held proportion had made the path obedient to memory. People imagine that geometry began when men drew lines and named angles, but the first geometry may have had dust on its heels. A person who can count a path, turn at the right place, double the distance, and return to the start already knows something that a diagram will later formalize. The earth was measured first by hunger, fear, and feet. The dust marks did not satisfy Thoth. They helped while his hand was near them, while his voice still warmed them, while those who had walked the path could remember what each bare line meant. But the marks alone were thin. They had no flesh. Dur forgot which curve stood for the gully and which for the basin. Ash reversed the return. The children copied the scratches as scratches, pleased with the blackness of charcoal, but blind to the way hidden inside them. A bare line was too easily orphaned from its meaning. Then the wounded deer came down from the upper wood. It had been torn by cats or wolves and had run badly, leaving dark spots on stone. The hunters followed at a distance until it collapsed beneath a leaning slab near the berry slope. When Thoth reached it, the animal was already still. Its head lay low, its back rose in a long, tense curve, its legs folded and thrust at angles, one foreleg tucked beneath the chest, one hind leg extended as though it still meant to run. Reed knelt beside it and touched its flank with the tenderness hunters sometimes gave the dead. Thoth stared at the body, and felt the path to the basin flare inside his mind. The ridge was the deer's back. The gully cut beneath the shoulder. The shale slope dropped like the foreleg. The basin lay under the throat. The return curved under the belly. What had been a set of scratches became a living form, though the animal itself was dead. He drew the deer in the dirt beside the body, not carefully at first. The back mattered more than the face. The shoulder mattered more than the eye. The leg mattered because it held the descent. The belly mattered because it returned. When he touched the deer's back and pointed toward the ridge, Reed understood. When he touched the foreleg and counted the shale steps, Ash understood. When he placed his hand under the throat and cupped it like water, even Dur stopped pretending not to understand. The deer held the path because everyone already knew a deer. No child mistook the back for the belly. No hunter forgot where the legs belonged. A deer could be turned in the mind and remain a deer. It could be drawn small in dirt, large on stone, or walked across the ground. The animal gave memory a body. In the days after, Thoth drew the deer again and again. Sometimes he made it face the sunrise. Sometimes he turned it toward the ridge. Sometimes he stretched the back when he wanted to speak of the longer route. Sometimes Reed shortened the legs to teach the children the smaller practice path near the shelter. The animal did not break when altered because its relations held it together. Thoth began to understand three things that had been separate before. The animal was familiar enough to be remembered. The path was ordered enough to be walked. The image was stable enough to hold both together. A mark could now do more than show where his hand had been. It could carry a way through space. Modern people stand before painted animals and ask why the ancient ones loved beasts so much, feared them so much, worshipped them so deeply. They would not be entirely wrong. Animals filled the world of early people with danger, food, motion, beauty, and power. But an animal body also solved a problem. It gave shape to invisible relation. It allowed the mind to carry distance as form. Once Thoth had seen a route inside the deer, the land began offering bodies of its own. A river bend held the neck of a bird. A line of stones across the valley lay like the teeth of a jaw. A hill with two knobs became the shoulders of a sleeping beast. At first this troubled him. Too many likenesses came. Some were false and vanished when walked. Some held only from one place and failed from another. Some were tricks of hunger or cloud shadow. Thoth learned not to trust resemblance until the feet confirmed it. Reed brought him north after a rain, to a ridge where berries grew thick in hollows. People often failed to find the best descent. They turned too soon and entered thorn, or too late, and came down among loose stone. Reed knew the berry place, but teaching it had always been difficult because the ridge changed character as one moved along it. From below it was only a dark line. From above it bent smoothly, then broke into three raised humps before falling toward a hidden spring. Thoth tried the deer in his mind and rejected it. The deer's back was too light, its shoulder too quick, its leg too narrow for the descent. He tried the horse and rejected that too. Then he remembered the great Aurochs killed 2 winters before, so heavy that 6 people had labored to roll it, with its lowered head, thick neck, strong shoulder, and long back. The ridge entered that body and stayed. He drew the Aurochs in damp soil with his finger. The long ridge lay along the back. The 3 raised humps became bristles cut along the spine. The safe descent fell from the shoulder like a foreleg. The hidden spring rested near the lowered head. The return through open ground curved beneath the belly. Reed watched, then took a sharpened stick and deepened the 3 cuts along the back. Not smooth, she said in her own sounds, striking each cut. High, broken, hard, that mattered. The deer path to water had a smoother back. because the ridge there ran like one continuous line. This ridge needed a marked back, a broken back, a bristled back. The animal was not decoration. Its surface had to remember the land's surface. A smooth line could lie if the ground was broken. A bristled line could warn the feet before they reached the ridge. That evening, beneath a stone overhang near the shelter, Thoth marked the Aurochs with charcoal and red earth. He began with the back because the back was the ridge. He added the shoulder because the shoulder was the descent. Reed insisted on the 3 bristles. Flint, watching from the side, pressed a dark return line under the belly with one thick finger. The mark was crude, but those who knew the ridge could see the root. Those who did not know it could be taken there and made to understand. Thoth felt the 3 powers of the new practice settle into him. A known part of the animal could catch hold of a real feature. The real feature could choose the animal that fit it. Once the fit was found, the rest of the body could unfold and show where the remaining parts of the journey belonged. Far in the future, humans would marvel at ancient animal figures and treat every mane, spine, hair, and cut as style, magic, or ornament. Some of it may have become those things. But in the beginning, a rough line could warn of rough ground. A thick flowing back could remember water. A bristled spine could carry a ridge. The visible body of the animal could become the readable body of the earth. The overhang failed in the rains. At first, the Aurochs darkened beautifully when wet, and the children liked to touch it. Then water began to run from the stone above and carry the red earth downward in thin veins. Moss found the lower belly. Dogs scraped near the return line. Smoke from the shelter fire blurred the shoulder. By the next berry season, the back remained, but the descent had faded, and the head was little more than a stain. Reed stood before it with her jaw tight, as though someone had insulted the ridge itself. Flint struck the wall with his fist. The sound was dull, too soft, too exposed, too near hands, rain, smoke, animals, and careless children. A memory worth keeping needed a better place. There was a cave above the winter valley, a place the children avoided, and adults entered only when need overcame unease. Its mouth was narrow, half hidden by stone and brush. Inside, the air cooled quickly. Sound returned strangely. Firelight did not sit still there. It crawled and leapt, making stone swell and withdraw like breathing skin. The cave was not a place for ordinary talk. It made every gesture seem older than the person making it. Thoth entered with Reed, Flint, and Ash, who had become careful with flame. They carried fat lamps, charcoal, red earth, groundstone, and a strip of hide wrapped around pigment. The first chamber was damp, so they moved deeper. The second wall shone with mineral wetness and was rejected. At last, Reed found a dry wall where the stone curved slightly inward, protected from seep and touch. She held the lamp low. The surface warmed, shadows lifted from it like animals waking. Thoth began with the back, always the back first, because the back held the land. He drew it long and heavy, then paused for Reed's 3 bristles where the ridge broke. He set the shoulder carefully, then the foreleg of descent. Flint marked the belly return in black. Ash, remembering the water route, asked with a gesture whether the deer should be placed beside it. Thoth hesitated, then nodded. The wall was large enough for more than one memory. They worked until the lamps guttered. The cave filled with fat smoke and the smell of wet stone, earth, breath, and fear. When they stepped back, 2 animals stood where there had been only stone, the deer of water and the aurochs of berries. They were not complete in the way a dead animal was complete. Their most important parts were strongest. Backs, shoulders, turns, descents, returns. Enough for memory, enough for teaching. When the children were brought later, They were not brought to admire, they were brought to learn. Thoth walked the smaller path outside. Reed corrected their turns. Ash made them count the shale and the berry descent. Only then were they taken into the cave. The wall did not speak by itself. It spoke when joined to walking. A child saw the back, remembered the ridge, touched the bristles, felt the hard humps underfoot, and understood why the line was broken. The image and the path woke each other. Thoth stood behind them in the lamp glow and felt something larger than his own life take shape. The water had nearly been lost because one man's memory was too small. The path had entered other bodies but still could die with them. The dust marks had vanished. The overhang had failed. But this wall was dry, hidden, and patient. It would keep what mouths forgot and what rain erased. The three needs had finally found one another, a pattern that could be shown, a repetition that could be shared, and a place that could preserve the sharing. The cave did not make the knowledge sacred. The cave made it durable. Sacredness would come later, when people remembered the awe and forgot the use. Some enter such darkness and assume that only gods, spirits, or mysteries could justify the labor. They see the difficulty of the place, the care of the marks, the long survival of the images, and imagine belief as the first cause. But for Thoth and those around him, the value needed no hidden doctrine. The child could walk the route, the hunter could find the water, the gatherer could descend the ridge safely, the group could return. That was enough. That was more than enough. The first revelation was not that animals were holy. It was that the world could be held in their shapes, carried in the body, fixed on stone, and given to those not yet born.